Hello, hello. I'm so excited. I have literally just this minute just finished approving the proof for this year's calendar printing. Each year, the calendar includes that year's new paintings mixed in with a few classics of the past. This year's paintings include bird silhouettes and lush gardens, painted compasses and stars. There's one with a boat tied to a giant red poppy flower called Our Boat. And as usual, lots of botanical inspiration. I can't help myself, of course. There's even one with a mirror image pair of red fiddles. This is a limited edition printing, so I will only print once, and when they are gone, they'll just be gone. Last year they sold out, which was so fun. Everyone signed up for my email list gets first chance to snag their calendars before they are available to the public. If you would like that to be you, go to bit.ly/Fain House to sign up for the email list. You can also find this link in this episode's show notes. I hope you're having an awesome week, and I hope too that you enjoy this episode. How can you do all that needs done in life and still pursue your desire to learn French or the guitar or grow a plant or make art? You can't put a fiddle under your pillow and wake up playing it, though how cool would that be? But one thing we can do, no matter how chaotic and overwhelming life can be, is know that every tiny small motion in the direction of those endeavors really do matter. And not only that, they add up over time with great momentum. Join me, Annie Fain Barrelon, as I interview painters and gardeners, designers and musicians, photographers and cooks, creative livers of any kind, who have somehow, in the middle of it all, continued on their creative paths, no matter what. This is Fain House Radio, and I'm so glad you're here.
My name is Margaret Cogswell, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. The first thing that pops into my head is something that, in a way, I want to censor because I think, wow, because it's my kids. I was a stay-at-home mom. I took that very seriously, raising my children. I had somewhat of a chaotic upbringing, and I made a promise to myself that if I ever had children, I was going to try to do it differently. It was a very conscious decision on my part, too, in terms of timing. And so I am at a point now in my life where my kids are grown, and I see the fruition of what happened and the time that was spent and the energy and the creativity that I brought to that. I couldn't always see that in the moment because I think it's true for my studio work. Often when we're involved in something and we're really in it, you really don't know where that's leading, and you don't have the gift of being able to see it later into the future. And so much of raising a child too, especially when they're young, it doesn't feel like there's going to be a future. It's just dealing with it in the moment. But I was very committed, and I felt that way in the same way that I feel committed to living a creative life. And at the time, I don't think I could see that was part of living a creative life, which is what I'd say is the most important thing to me now. I in the fullness of time, I can see they were part of that. At the same time I was raising my kids, I was doing my artwork, but that was always second. And I committed to that too. Yeah, creative endeavors, family's right in there with the things that I make.
I love your mentioning it because especially when children are smaller, I know that every parent thinks to themselves, where did I go? Where did my needs go? Where did my creative life go? And there's a teeny maybe bit of fear thinking it's gone forever. But actually what you're saying acknowledges that we have phases. And if we focus, for example, on children in that phase, it doesn't mean we don't get to be in a different phase later, which is taking the time to focus only on our art. And one thing I really admire about you is you focus so much on the family side. And then when the time was right and you had the opportunity, you went to Penland to be a resident, which meant moving and living there for a little while. And what was that debate like for you, balancing the focus on family life and then also knowing the time was right to go focus on you and your artwork and knowing that that was okay and a good thing?
Well, I want to put one more thing in there about kids, is that I think when they're real young, like toddler and infant, it's hard to do this. But after that point, that can be really, the challenge was to bring my creative mind to that process. So there was always something you could do that was fun, or like, let me look at this a different way. What could we do? Inventing things or making things or just being with them in a way that stimulated me, not just them. Yeah, going to Penland was, I look back and think I did that in the sense that our son had gone to college and our daughter was a junior in high school. I had just helped my husband go, he's a psychologist, and we had bought a little building and renovated it. And he left the group he was working with and went into private practice. And I was applying for the residency at that time. And it was probably, the timing was poor for everybody else, but it was that time where I thought, it's this or it's graduate school, and it's now or never. Otherwise, I'm going to end up being bitter. I just had that sense. I could see where I was going, and I had to open some doors, but I didn't know how to do that exactly. I also knew I couldn't totally leave, couldn't go too far away. I looked at some graduate schools that were within driving distance, and I didn't get as big a spark as I did from Penland. And I knew it was a long shot, primarily because I hadn't been really putting myself out there publicly in a while. And I didn't have a graduate degree. I had a Bachelor of Arts degree, but not fine arts. I was older. I was almost 50. And I knew that might not matter, but it just seemed like it was a long shot. It turned out that in some ways it was a long shot. I was an alternate, and one of the people couldn't come. And so I got a chance. And in the end, I got feedback that they were really glad that had worked out that way, because I think I brought something to the program, to being at that point in my life. I was a different kind of resident. And I think it was good for Penland, and it was more than good for me. It was the first time in my life that I could work until I wanted to go to bed. When do we ever get that, right? It really felt, the first few months, I don't think I slept through the night because my energy was just so big and I was so jazzed up. The freedom too was tremendous, and the support that Penland gave me in terms of, there's you pay your own rent for your housing in your studio, but everything else is available to you. By having an open studio too, and you're working the gallery, they promote you in a way that you just can't. It's a tremendous gift all the way around. And to be in that community of other people making, and then having, when school's in session, there are these teachers from all over the world, makers from all over the world, and they're talking about their work. And so, yes, it was quite a gift all the way around, and a gift from my husband, because he became a single dad. I came home on weekends. I was there Monday through Friday and would come home Friday night. And I was pulling double my weight. I would come home and I'd go clean the office that we owned, and I'd, try to cook, and I would clean the house. I was doing both, but it was worth it to me.
For people who don't know about that particular program, so it was 3 years, and you had fellow resident artists. Were there 3 of you?
Actually, there are 7 total across media. There's their glass blower, potter. It's somewhat studio specific, but there's not always a person making glass, a glass blower, and there's not always somebody in paper, but generally it's across the range.
I've been a student there multiple times and studio assistant. And one thing that's so fun is going to see the resident artists, see what they're working on. It's very exciting and special place. And I'm so happy for you. You had those 3 years and found a way to let yourself have that, instead of thinking, oh no, I can't leave my family, because it doesn't mean anybody's abandoned. You spent years focused on them, and how to balance both. And what you're talking about, being so jazzed up, your level of appreciation for that time, I can imagine you cranking it out.
Yeah. And, I also think that at that point, I also felt like I was being a good role model for my kids too, in terms of saying, this is something I want for myself. and I'll figure out a way to make it work. If this is important to me, I'm going to go for it, you know. I mean, on the practical side, when I speak about Penland sometimes and like, what did I get out of it? I think it was for me because I didn't go to graduate school. It was kind of my finishing school, and it helped me. I learned some practical things. I taught myself that in terms of, you know, business things and how to talk about my work. What's my work about? Not being afraid to talk about my work. But it gave me the platform to do that.
And some validation because they agreed that you deserve that. You deserve to be there. People could come appreciate and see and acknowledge what you were working on. And that's very special and important instead of being alone at home in your studio all the time for years, you know, just to be kind of out there a little bit and be like, okay, it's okay. You know, people see me and I see them.
Yeah, so true. And I think, you know, I love to have fun, but I'm kind of a serious person and I take things seriously. And another gift from being there was seeing how my work affected people. And as you're saying, when you're just in your studio making it, you don't get that feedback from people that often. If you do, it's like you have a show or something. But at Penland, most of the resident artists have a little section of their studio that's like a gallery in a sense, or a little, you know, they have things for sale. But because I wasn't there on weekends too, I had this little setup and I left a guest book there, and I would come back and people would leave these comments. And it really meant the world to me because I understood that even though I've always been a person who makes things, I can feel like, what's the reason? Does it matter? Not that fuels me, but you know, when I step outside my need, does this have any effect? Also, I think I had a little bit of self-doubt because my work tends to be very playful and childlike, even though I know there's some sophisticated feelings behind the work I produce. I still am really going for those elemental feelings of getting you to connect with some simple thoughts, you know, simple emotional feelings. I could get some direct feedback. Oh, this matters. And it created a lot of questions that made me want to seek the answers for it. You know, in the end, for me, I just really want to learn something. And that's once I stop feeling like I'm learning, if I start feeling bored, it's time to move on. And that also affects things monetarily. I mean, you probably have that too. I could make the decision to stay on this path because I am selling my work, but it doesn't matter to me because I've lost interest and it's all about where the energy is. That's where I can connect with something that's bigger than myself too.
Say, for example, you chose to keep making the thing only because it was selling. Well, you could do that for years. And that's years that you weren't developing something different. Think about an artist, and as we age, or a musician, and as we age, it's like it gets seasoned and it gets more defined and it gets clearer. But if we get stuck at a certain stage, we're not participating in that development anymore.
Yeah, and really looking at it's all one. It's funny, I was going back and listening to some of your old podcasts, and there was a woman talking about, I can't remember her name right now, but she was a musician and maker. But it's not like I've got my studio time and then I'm this other thing. My goal for myself is to keep that kind of energy for thinking outside the box or just a new way to do it, to keep that always up front. That's really the guiding thing for me.
It also means it's a lifestyle choice. So you're always swimming in it. The beauty of that is you're just taking a walk, or anything you do that's outside of your quote studio hours can be inspiration. Like that feeling to me, the inspirations everywhere is so strong. You could be driving in the car, you could take a nap, and bam, you get an idea, or somebody says something, or something. It's not a switch that just turns off.
Right. And my appreciation, the jazz I can get out of making something is the same as taking a hike. It's all about being really alive in whatever you're doing. It's a certain amount of mindfulness, I think.
We met within the world of book arts and bookmaking. Both of us also do other things, but that was like a connection point. Some people also know you from making crowns, and then you also make things that appear only as toys, but as you're saying, there's a sophistication behind it, and you're using all kinds of mixed media to make what you make. And I really encourage everyone to go in the links of the show notes to check out your work that you're working on right now. What it would be the main things you're working on at the moment, because I know it changes through time.
Yeah, it does. I've always got a number of things going on. Ongoing project, which was another one of your questions. It's a tiny gallery, which is a tiny little gallery I have on the street at the bottom of our property. We have a lot of walkers in our neighborhood. I built it during the pandemic. That's an ongoing thing for me. So it doesn't have my work in it. It has some other artists, but I open and close it, and I'm contacting artists, and it's not a huge time taker for me, but it has a huge place in my heart. I feel like it's a stand-in for me and what I value. There's the tiny gallery. There's our daughter just moved here a year and a half ago. She and her partner bought a wood-fired bakery out in Marshall, and it's supposed to open in September, but I've been spending a lot of time helping her either in the yard. I've built a garden shed. I'm helping her paint, and I really am interested in seeing creatively what she's producing and kind of birthing this thing, this business that she's doing, being part of the process, but not being the producer, kind of walking along with her in a sense. And as far as direct making in the studio, I'm working on paper mâché animals. I'm kind of at a point where I'm letting things just come to me in terms of what I want to make. And it's a short-term inspiration in a sense. Like a few weeks ago, I made a bunch of hand puppets and put them in the tiny gallery. I was doing some teaching. I'm kind of letting things just come to me. I'm not as directed. I don't have the ambition I used to have. And at first that really worried me. I think it's probably age related, but I think it's also just I'm less and less interested in my career necessarily, and more just interested in being engaged in things, living a creative life. And often that's just not necessarily making another object. Does that make sense?
Yes, because in a way, it's like you're feeling less pressure. The other part of it too is in that focused time is production focused. So it sounds like what you're describing is like, okay, production's not the thing for me right now. It is making what I want to make and letting it kind of arrive.
Yeah, or being in the world differently than I have been before. A lot of my life, I've been scared of people. I can cover that up really well because I can put on a good face and I'm sociable, but I felt like I've kept a lot behind that face. I really spend a lot of energy now on being very much that person you're seeing. It's also the person who's making. It's very direct for me. And that's a challenge. And I'm scared and also jazzed by it because the energy that comes from being with people or showing yourself to people is a creative energy also. You begin to realize that people in relationships, that's really all we've got in the end. Things are things, right? That's something I wanted to work with and is another way, I guess, of when I say a creative life, it's not necessarily a thing I'm making, but I'm pushing myself. I'm taking things that are a challenge or scary to me and looking at them and trying to walk up to them and make friends with them. But when I get to the studio or I feel like making something, all that I've been working on in between, whether it's getting to know people or working with the tiny gallery or whatever, that all still informs, that all comes with me.
Talking about your tiny gallery project and what I wanted to ask you about it a little more. It seems like a human connection project.
Yeah.
It's like you're saying, it's not just your work in it. It's almost like a reason for you to connect some people. You can just cold call people and say hello. That's a little bit weird. If you have a collaboration idea, that's totally different.
Yeah.
Like doing this interview together, we could actually talk in a way that's so different if we just talked on the phone or something. And so I'm imagining for you that the tiny gallery is a way to say, hey, do you want to come put your work here? And then you get to like really hang out with whoever the artist is of the moment for a minute around this project in a different way than sitting there and having a martini, And I think
Yeah.
it's very cool. And also it has an element of surprise. So anyone in your neighborhood is walking by and can peek in there, so that's also a public art offering.
In my artist statement that I wrote years ago, there's something in there about loving the surprise of the everyday moment. And I feel like, in a sense, that's an embodiment of what the tiny gallery is for me. It's not advertised. You come across it and it's whatever you want it to be. And the work that's in there changes. It's just a gift. There's nothing asked of you, but it has its own life. I started it during the pandemic, and I had taken a few years ago, I took a construction class at AB Tech. I've always wanted to build a small house and just didn't have any basic skills. I'm very hardy, but I'm kind of small and I'm not super strong, but I have a lot of energy and I just wanted to learn some, techniques. And so I took this class and I learned some things, but if I'm not doing it over and over again, I forget. And so I just decided, it was during the pandemic, and they were asking us not to leave too. Most of the stores were closed. So I had a bunch of materials here, and I challenged myself just to build this thing with what I had. And I was going to use some materials from a mobile gallery that Mark Boyd, who's a friend, he still works at Penland, and we had constructed this mobile gallery that you could put together and take apart. And I still had the parts to it, but hadn't used it in a while. And so I decided I would start with that, which was 4 hollow core doors. As I was building it, I realized, oh my gosh, everybody's coming to, each day I would be out there, all the neighbors would be coming and saying, what are you doing? And and of course, during the pandemic, people were out walking a lot. It became almost a community project before I had gotten halfway through. I finished it and I invited all the neighbors on my street to put something in there, and we had an opening, and it was so fun. And the next weekend, my daughter, who's a professional baker, had a big bake sale, and that was during the time that it was Bakers Against Racism, and it was like a community gathering spot. Then I started putting my work in there, and I realized after a few months, I can't sustain this. I'm bored, right? I don't want to just keep making things to go in there. Oh, I started asking people to put their things in. They got excited. And then I realized, oh, well, this is the function here. I can put things in every now and then, or I can do it with somebody, but it's functioning on several different levels too. The fact that it runs on the honor system also is really special to people and special to me. I had an experience that one day I was rushing around. Somebody had just put their work up the day before, and I hadn't taken the time to go see it yet. I stopped the car and told myself, you must stop, because, by the end of the day, some of the work may have sold. And I went in and I just started looking at the work. It was probably only, it's a tiny thing. It took me 5 minutes maybe. And then I got back in my car and I just did this almost like a body scan. And I realized, oh my gosh, I'm in a completely different place than I was when I stopped to walk, to go in and look. And it was a little light bulb, like, oh, this is amazing. And it's not like, oh, I'm so amazing I did this. This isn't me. This is what happens when you put something out with good intent. Yeah.
And also, like you're saying, I know most artists, creators think every once in a while, well, what am I offering for real? Am I just making another product? But what you just described is you set up the scenario and then someone's artwork was there and you had a delightful moment looking at their work, and then it made you feel different after, like physiologically. So It is powerful, and it is important in the world that these things of beauty or music or dance is around us.
Yeah, that's what we hope for, right? That's what art is about. Like your question, what ways do you see being a creator being good for you, the planet, and all the people in it? I think that's related to that. You're transforming, or you're presenting a different way of looking at things. I was going to say you're helping people understand themselves better, but it's selfish too, because I'm helping myself understand myself better and my place in the world. But we're doing it together.
It was years ago, but I do want to ask you about it because so many people listening have been making and are wondering, Are there other ways I could share my work? What other opportunities might happen to make sure that we're always open to all different ways to be sharing? You're an author of a book, and I wanted to ask about that. It's called Book Play, Creative Adventures in Handmade Books. What was that process like for you? It's easy to say, oh, you did a book, but there's a lot that goes into something like that.
Lark Books was still a going concern here. They asked me if I would do it, and I said, yeah, it was going to be a how-to book. As I often am, I was scared, but I thought, okay, I want to know what this is like. I want to do this. At the time, I wasn't making as many books. That was an added challenge. I had kind of transitioned during Penland to doing more paper mâché. They contracted for so many projects, and we had a timeline, and making that book was really a group effort. It is a total collaboration between you and a lot of people. And yet you get a lot of it's your name on it. It looks like I did the whole thing. And the company, Sterling, provided 2 editors and a photographer, and I would write it all up in steps. I did a lot of the illustrations, but not the technical illustrations, so they had somebody do that. I was really willing to give over to the company however they wanted this to come out, except my personal goal was for the final book to feel like something I had made, to still have that feel, it looked like my work. And then the other is something kind of silly, but it was important to me, which was rounded corners, because that felt like something that you wouldn't just get out of a trade book, and it would just give it a little personality. We got the rounded corners, and I think it came off. I don't know, you birth that baby and it goes out there, and then, you move on to the next thing.
It's one thing to be inspired and then go make the idea you just thought of. But it's another thing, sort of like an assignment, to say, okay, come up with 10 projects that fit the description of adventures in handmade books, for example, right? How do you go about thinking of how to complete that assignment? Because of course you need variety between projects. So it's fun for the people that want to try the projects. Did you think, okay, I'm going to use this many different binding styles? Were you thinking, okay, make sure to infuse your own style, but make sure it was still approachable and something somebody could make? How did you come up with what those projects were?
I wasn't going to have anything that was a complicated binding, because this wasn't that type of book, and that's not my skill either. When I was working in book arts, what I was interested in is, where are the lines between what makes a book and not a book? Where can you push those boundaries? All of that interest the book arts interest for me I continue to be, and as a child was a very slow reader. And so visuals were very important to me. I learned by doing, not by reading. The physicality and what makes a book, asking those questions. And when I was coming up with the projects, I was keeping in my head, I want people to have success, since some of them are complicated. I want there to be a range of projects, not only in skill level, but in what makes a book.
I'm just imagining if I was ever approached with a project like that, it's a little bit daunting. You're trying to create something that's not quite what you're making every day. You're trying to create something only for this project, and also think of the audience that will be absorbing it later.
They asked me to come up with 20 projects, and that was hard. I remember at about 15, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm just going to be pulling these others out. And I don't want it to feel like that. Oh, this is just something else she slapped on there, Where's that line between what you can come up with that's really generated from the inside and what just feels like, okay, well, I had to have one more idea, which is something that is always a concern when I'm making something, that I am present with the thing, because I feel like if I'm present, then I transfer some of my energy and my intent into whatever I'm making, and that's the thing that gives it life, and that's the thing that people connect with. Essentially, when it comes down to it, that's the energy inside there.
Well, congratulations in completing that huge project.
Thank you. So I have a question for you.
Okay.
On something like that, and I know you've done you're a lot like me in the sense that you are just a creative force. I mean, in this, like, that's important. You look out of those types of eyes. It's important to you to be engaged in the world in that way. So do you feel like when you make things that are now maybe 5 years old, do you look back at those, or are you just looking forward most of the time?
In a way, it depends on the medium that I'm working with. With my paintings, I, from the beginning, kind of would fall in love with them. And that's why I sell prints. Mm-hmm. And so I do like to visit them. I love them very much. I don't know how to describe why or where that comes from. Yeah. But it's almost like a surprise. It's just a surprise that it happened. I'm like, wow. And so I do like to visit them to see, I can see a clear lineage of how my drawing has gotten better, or my colors are getting brighter, and like some of the choices are changing. And it's kind of fun to see that line. With book arts, it definitely was more, okay, I've made this product and I passed it on, and it kind of cranks through in a different way. And I also feel like with making handmade books, it's using a different part of the brain. Like any medium we have is a different part of the brain. And so a lot of them are made and then gone, like I don't have images of every single one or anything like that. With music, it's interesting because you've made it and then it just goes out into the air and it's over, unless you make a CD, which is not my goal really. Maybe one day with the group I'm in, maybe, but I kind of like that idea that you did a concert and it was a moment in time and then poof, it's gone.
I was thinking about, it doesn't resonate to me to have, there are a lot of artists out there who keep their work around and are very much attached to what they've done, right? I'm not saying, oh, I did that. I never think about it. It's still a part of me. But I'm more interested in, okay, now what am I going to do? You put that in the basket and you carry it with you to the next thing, but it feels like it was yesterday.
I totally see what you're saying. And it connects a little bit to what we were talking about. If you halt your own development only because you're making something that sells, so you just get caught in production. I mean, I agree with you there. Like, I feel like it's like you're in a river and you picked up your feet and you're floating, and it has a force to it. And we're never just going to stop. The idea of creating something and then just sitting there staring at that and being frozen in time is not the creative process. It's a flow, it's a flow, it's a flow. It's moving, it's moving, it's moving. Hopefully not too fast of a pace. Hopefully a pace where we enjoy the float,
Yes.
So I see what you're saying in that way, because I think that something we share is like this moment of true delight that's very pure when we get a new fun idea and something we want to try. Mm-hmm. And so then it makes sense. Well, what's the next new fun idea? What's it even going to be? We don't even know. It's fun. Yeah. And then the beginnings of a project, or the beginnings of attempting to learn what you would need to learn, or that's the exciting time. That's an exciting time.
Yeah. Being in that mix.
What is a trip you've taken recently? And is there anything from your trip that's showing up in your work or in some of your ideas?
It hasn't necessarily literally shown up in my work yet, but this spring, I was in Greece for 6 weeks, and 3 of those weeks I was working there with my brother-in-law, my husband Dan's brother, Jim Cogswell. He teaches painting at the University of Michigan, and he also does these huge vinyl installations, and it's colorful vinyl that is applied to windows. So it's usually on foundations and hospitals and places like that where they have these large windows. The vinyl, it's applied, but it's not applied on top of each other. All the pieces fit together. And so it's like putting a puzzle together. It's very tedious and really fun. The minutia of it. I really enjoy working with him. He had a project in Athens at a film foundation. I went to help him with that. I love traveling, but the way I like to travel is to stay in a place, not to be constantly moving or just only seeing the things that you would think a tourist would see. And so the experience of living there and working there really feeds me, because I feel like I begin to understand just a little bit, but I see the culture in a different way, and can appreciate the visuals that I'm seeing also, and all that history. And I had seen those things, but only in books. I had never been to Greece before. I really was so touched by everything that's there is infused with, it just has to be, with the history. And there's a lot of things that here in the US, because our culture is different and our landscape, the dirt, everything's different. There's a lot that seems exotic when you're here and you're looking over there. And then when you get there, you realize it's not exotic here. It's just because I'm looking at it through my eyes of living in another place. And those little light bulb moments help me to understand things, which then broaden my views. And then when I'm making something, I'm thinking about that. So images, I saw some images of animals that were found at the Acropolis that are still in my head, and images of looking across the hillside at the olive groves in this very rugged landscape. Those images they're imprinted on me in a way that I really feel so enriched by that experience. And it will come out. It's simmering back there, you know?
It's so cool that you were traveling, but through work and through working with your hands and through staying in one place. I mean, you're right. That's really, really different, a different way to be there.
Well, you ought to know, right? Because by having family in another country and spending time there, you are experiencing the culture in a different way.
What are those images where when you unfocus your eyes and relax, it comes forward 3D? Because it's like over your first visit, you're just seeing first layer. Your next visit is next layer, next layer. And then through time, you're seeing things much more 3D than a first visit, which is very two-dimensional because you might not understand the language and you're just absorbing so much information and you have jet lag and there's a lot going on. It's not comfortable exactly. Mm-hmm. But it is so fun having a chance to put that time in because really things start to take some shape.
They do. And I think you realize also people are just people no matter where you go. And yet we are all a product of our history. I had some interesting conversations. It was at that point, the war in Ukraine hadn't been going on that long. And I had interesting, surprising conversations about NATO and how Greek people feel about NATO and the war. And it's not always what you think. And that was, again, that feels like a gift to me because now I know something I didn't know before. And that understanding is precious to me.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing because that's very different than listening to the news.
It is. I think in some ways I'm bringing it back to the tiny gallery, but that's my little ray of hope right there. That's the way I feel like, can I construct the world the way I want it to be? And okay, there's some harsh reality. I still am convinced that being positive is better than just doing nothing.
This question might not pertain exactly. Some people deal with getting stuck, like really stuck. You hear about writer's block or you hear about, oh my gosh, I have to produce all these things because I'm going to be in this book or what, like these projects. I'm going to teach this class. Do you ever feel a stuck feeling? If you do, how do you get unstuck?
I sometimes do, but it doesn't happen very often. And really, this is probably true for you too. I mean, I think it's true of most people who make things because it's just the way we work. I've got lots of things going on at one time or that are in midstream or a project I can pick up or it's part of the way I work is, especially if I'm making a series of animals, I naturally have several going at the same time because they dry at different rates. And if I'm feeling stuck, I make myself just come down to the studio, clean or organize or write a letter. I used to send more mail than I do now, but I still send a fair amount. And I just start. If I can just start, it's gone. Within 15 minutes, I'm engaged and it's walking over the threshold. It's the same for me as getting out of bed in the morning. It's the moment of action. I just tell myself, you know you want to do this. You just think you don't right now. I can remember at Penland sometimes if I was in a quandary over something, either something I was making or, Penland was a really social place and that was a challenge for me. I would tell myself, who do you want to be? Which person do you want to be? I know the person I want to be. And I just start walking towards that in some sort of action. it's okay then.
So when in doubt, get in motion.
Get in motion. Just take that one step and the rest follows. And maybe that motion is going to take you in a totally different direction. So maybe you don't want to be in the studio anyway, but you're going to be moving. I used to, before the pandemic, I took Pilates, and I've taken yoga for years. And that's one of my teachers. She used to say, if you're not moving, you're dying. She said, even if you're in the hospital and you can't move anything, blink your eyes, because if you're not moving, you're dying.
I like that as a motto. At least blink your eyes. Just something.
Right.
Are there any sacrifices you've made to follow your creative path and stick with it and stick on it?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on that earlier in terms of monetary issues. I'm comfortable, but I have to make choices. In some way, I'm kind of a glass half full gal, and I'm very grateful for pretty much everything. I see the world in that way. I'm thankful for the simple things. So I don't know. That's an interesting question, Annie Fain, because how do you define sacrifice in a way? And sacrifice is often, dare I say, a good thing, but not having is sometimes better than having. It helps you to understand what you want, why you want, or do you want? Money's the first thing that pops into my head, but other than that, I don't know. And am I naive? Maybe.
But I think what you're saying, which I agree with, is it's not really sacrifices, it's choices, that it does come to choices. And to me, I think it's like having the guts to choose those choices, when it might not be a money thing, it might not be a comfort choice,
Yeah.
Because one thing I'm curious about, do you agree that if you had ignored, like what I was saying, I see it like this inner flame or whatever, if you ignored that and been an engineer instead, how do you think you would have felt? Or what do you think about that?
Well, I wonder, and one can't know. Every once in a while when I get frustrated, I think, all right, what did wise up, Margaret, you're still just doing this thing. But I know that's just one little voice in there, because I know how bad I wanted to make things. I still see every day I'll choose, I won't go for the monetary choice. It's just, I think mostly now I tell myself, don't ask that question anymore.
Yeah.
Don't. You could, but you've chosen this. And are you happy? Yes, I'm very happy. And do I feel lucky? Yes, I feel very lucky. Do I get down? Sure. Do I wish sometimes I had more money? Sure. Do I sometimes think I'm not very talented? Sure. All the doubts are still there. And again, I see it as a choice. What I want out of my life, I'm pretty clear. I couldn't necessarily write it down in a coherent paragraph, what I want in my life. But internally, I have a really good sense of what I want out of life. I know that's out there, and I make my choices to head that way. I sometimes wonder, though, I will ask you this question, because I do know I'm pretty driven in terms of and I think that's part of being driven, but you have an internal sense. I don't know that everybody has that. I think that's part of something I was born with in terms of being a driven person. Can you relate to that?
I feel like, I think it's true. It's not just if you were born into a creative family, it's not just those things. It's like, there's something that is personality related, and we either honor it or don't honor it. We might ignore it. But I've always had a very strong feeling, and I don't know how else to describe it, but I have to follow that feeling.
Yes. And sometimes it's clouded, and I gotta work through some of that foggy area, but choices about my life. I wasn't as clear about that when I was younger. I can see it now. I was making those decisions, but I didn't feel as certain about them. I think I've been married to my husband for 40 years, and we've had our rocky times, but I see even back then I was making a decision that I knew my compass, even though I didn't think I did.
I like what you're saying, because it's a reminder, number one, to be in touch with that feeling. And number two, we could trust the feeling.
You can't know that until you've done it, which is the hard thing.
Right.
Often hard when you're younger or when you're starting something new. You got to do it many times before you know, and you got to fail and you got to feel bad. In terms of making artwork as a maker, you make some bad work. But then I think that's the other thing you learn. Okay, I'll get up tomorrow and I'll keep at it. It doesn't mean it's the end of the world.
And maybe that's part of the purpose of our youth, is that we don't know, it's not clear yet. We're doing trial and error to try to find that clarity. Maybe that's a natural part of life path, and that is normal and good. Like, we're not born knowing all the stuff.
Yeah.
What is filling your inspiration cup these days?
The first three things that come up is, one is watching my daughter and her partner open this bakery and being part of that. And then our son and his wife have a 14-month-old. So being a grandmother and just experiencing a child in a different way. I think with my work, it's funny. It's like I'm still struggling with giving myself permission to let go of some of the ways I've existed as an artist and move into something that's not a product. It's just purely experiential.
Do you have any last words of encouragement for anyone and everyone out there doing their best to fold creativity into their daily lives, even when it's not easy?
Those words can sound hollow if you're in a place where it just seems impossible, right? Especially from me coming from a place where I have the availability of time and of having enough. But I think really what I'd say is to just trust your intuition, go towards what makes you happy and where the energy is, and ask questions and do something with your hands. Just make something, not for anybody else, but for yourself. It's not very profound. I think that when I teach, there are always some very reluctant people in there. Sometimes what people need is to be in company with somebody else and make something. I think being with another person or a group, and it doesn't have to be too structured, but just being with people often releases the reassurance that comes. And so maybe that's part of it too.
We forget how powerful it is to be near someone.
It's because often our culture doesn't reinforce that. Somehow this came into my head, but I know you will relate to this. My granddaughter was here this past week, and she's 14 months old, and she is a case. I mean, she just never stops. It is just so constant. Our son was here. My daughter-in-law had already gone back to Maine. He had some friends that were passing through town, and they're both musicians, and they came into the house with a lap harp. She had it braced on her knee, and he was playing a little ukulele. We were having a good time. The energy was really good in the room, and they started playing those instruments, and something happened. It was just like a whole nother universe opened up to me and to the little child. And what can happen when you start music up? It's magic, truly magic. And I think that happens when you make things too. It reminded me of like walking into the gallery and walking out, and then I had been transported. But you as a musician probably know that back and forward, but it's still something to me. It's like it's a magic moment.
I feel like it connects somewhere deep, deep inside ourselves, and that words aren't part of that. And it feels really good to the listener, and it feels really good to the player in theory. And if you think about the history of humans, music and art and dance, I mean, those have all been there the whole dang time. It is natural and normal and good for all of us. It doesn't have to be professional. It doesn't have to be done every day. We don't have to put that pressure on it. And we can just have those little moments that really are moving and surprising.
like that, to me, that's truly creativity going on, because you have taken just these tools and you put them together, and then you're transported. You are moved in the true sense of the word. That's like, worth $1 million.
If you would like to be in touch, email me at afainhouse@gmail.com. If you would like to watch these interviews in video form and are curious about the happenings of my little business called Fain House, where I paint and make art prints and gift cards from my watercolor originals, I'd love for you to sign up for my email list. When you do, you get a coupon for 10% off a one-time purchase in my Etsy shop and first dibs on my annual limited edition calendar printing. You will also be granted access to our free private Facebook group, which is the one spot you can watch these interviews. If this all sounds fun to you, go to your web browser and type bit.ly/Fainhouse to sign up. This is not a weekly newsletter, but rather a list of folks who are interested in hearing from me time to time. You can find this link, as well as links for each person I interview, in the show notes of each episode. Thanks so much to Margaret for joining us today, and thanks so much to you for listening. I'm Annie Fain Barrelon, and I'll leave you with a quote for the day. The creative adult is the child who survived. Ursula Le Guin.